It's the Resistance Report for December 4th, 2017, where we give you the big picture. We try to connect the dots. And tonight, we're trying to look at the connection between the Republican tax plan and the Republican plan to shred the social safety net. That is a big, big issue that is coming to the fore. And secondly, why the trickle-down economics that Republicans put forth always fails, and what the real alternative to trickle-down is, why the Democrats need to be pushing that alternative and not just criticizing trickle-down economics. And finally, the connection between all of this and the latest developments in the Trump-Russian connection and Trump's attempt to place himself above the law. Now, first, the tax cut and the attack on safety nets. Now, months ago, when you and many other people asked me whether Republican leaders could possibly get away with giving a huge tax cut to their corporate and wealthy patrons and then use the resulting deficit as an excuse to cut Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security, I said, no way. I was sure that if they tried this, the vast majority of Americans whose wages have been stagnating or declining for years, and who rely on Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, would be up in arms. The GOP would be a minority party for a generation. But let me just tell you something. Now that Trump and Republican leaders have succeeded this far, both the House and the Senate, in pulling the wool over a lot of people's eyes in terms of who gets and gains from this tax cut, I have to tell you I'm having a little bit of second thought here. You see, the problem is they, not just Trump, but they, Republican leaders, have zero integrity. When I say zero integrity, the kind of integrity index, what I mean is they're willing to lie continuously and hide what they're really doing. And they are already, through their lies and also obfuscations, they're already on the way to cutting safety nets in order to finance their tax cut. The Senate bill ends health coverage for 13 million Americans. Meanwhile, Orrin Hatch, the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, claims in his quote, I'm going to quote him, "We don't have money anymore," he said, "to provide health care for 9 million American kids." Since September, Republicans in Congress have refused to reauthorize the Children's Health Insurance Program. The cost of that program is roughly $15 billion a year for 9 million kids. Now, by contrast, the Trump Republican tax plan is going to cost the country $1.5 trillion. They have all the money to give to their rich friends and big corporations and patrons, sponsors, but none for 9 million needy kids? This is what we have come to, folks. Trump and Republicans in Congress are willing to deprive children health care to enrich their wealthy donors. Now, how is it possible? How is it possible? It's possible because of this, the big zero on integrity. Big lies told repeatedly can be convincing, especially when they are met with a tepid and underwhelming Democratic response. Trump himself, you know, I don't have to tell you, he's nothing but a con man, a salesman con man. He told Americans they would get a tax cut. And he himself, he said, he'd pay more taxes. I saw him. He said his accountant told him not to do this. Trump lies with impunity. He and people like him are going to be the biggest beneficiaries. You just get rid of even the estate tax, and he gets billions of dollars. His heirs get billions of dollars. The estate tax applies to only the top richest 0.2%. It's not a lot of farmers. There are 20 wealthy farm families, 20 that are affected by the estate tax. And what Trump does is he instructs Americans to trust his tweets over experts and the media. You know, some people say his protective coating is Teflon. He is Teflon as a coating. No, his protective coating is sleaze. He's willing to say and do anything. Now, many of you I know, let me just put Trump up here so we have, you know, the big zero integrity. This is the lowest point of integrity we can get. And several of you are feeling, I know you're feeling discouraged right now. You never thought Republicans could get this far. I understand. Cutting taxes on big corporations and the wealthy while cutting safety nets for people in need and for the elderly. The elderly, by the way, who've already paid into Medicare and Social Security. How can you cut Medicare and Social Security when they've already paid into it? These are called entitlements, but the word entitlement doesn't mean that people just feel entitled out of no sacrifice at all. No, you and everybody else pays into Medicare and Social Security. This is beyond outrageous. The big money, the Koch brothers, the Mercers, and others, behind all of this makes a travesty of our democracy. And then there's Trump's and the Republican assault on the environment. I mean, today, slashing the size of the nation's treasure of national monuments. What is he doing? And then you've got yesterday and the day before and today, this morning, his ever more belligerent and dangerous foreign policy. He retweets videos by anti-Islamic extremists. This is the President of the United States. He supports Roy Moore for Senate in Alabama. And then you've got Jeff Sessions' so-called Justice Department, which is in the process of dismembering civil rights enforcement. And there's supposed to be a border, a clear border, not a wall, a border between the President's office, the White House, and the Justice Department. And what is Trump doing and what is Sessions doing? Obliterating that. And what about DACA? And the Trump and Republican attacks on immigrants, and Betsy DeVos's attack on public education, and Trump's continuing attacks on any critics or opposing centers of power, not just the press, but also the FBI. Look at it goes on and on and on. It's kind of shock and awe. And it is intended in a way to overwhelm all of us. Give us a headache, eat away at our brains. Now, my advice to you is to take a deep breath and focus on the single most important thing you could focus on in terms of Trump and the Republicans. And I'm talking about the midterm elections coming up next year, 2018 midterms, and flipping the House and possibly the Senate too. Now, in order to do this, we've got to organize and mobilize and get the truth out, the truth. What's at stake here is the future of our democracy. It's also, by the way, the future of our economy, which brings us to the underlying economic fight that's going on between trickle-down economics. This is the way the Republicans for years have justified giving big benefits to their patrons. Trickle-down economics. The alternative is what the Democrats should be advocating. It's often thought, wrongly, that Democrats care about fairness and not economic growth, while Republicans care about growth, even at the cost of some fairness. That is rubbish. Growth and fairness are not opposites. Growth and fairness are actually complements. You can't get growth without fairness. Tax cuts on corporations and the rich don't and have never spurred growth. The only way to grow the economy is by investing in the education, healthcare, and infrastructure that average Americans depend on in order to be more productive. Growth doesn't trickle down, it rises up. Education, healthcare, and infrastructure investment are the keys not just to productivity and fairness, but to the economy. Republicans say their tax overhaul will promote growth by increasing the profits of American corporations and investors. This is trickle-down nonsense. Every major study finds that the benefits of these tax cuts will go mainly to big corporations and the wealthy. Share prices may rise for a time. They rose today, 200 points. They're already at record highs in anticipation of the tax cut. That's what's really going on. But higher share prices do not trickle down either. The richest 1% of Americans owns 38% of the value of the stock market. So when the stock market is going up in response to a potential tax cut on corporations, you know that the biggest beneficiaries in terms of even the stock market are at the very top. 80% of Americans together own just 8% of the stock market, all shares of stock. So in other words, these tax cuts are not going to fuel growth. Corporations expand and invest only when customers are eager to buy what they produce. And most of these customers are middle income and below, who spend just about all they earn. The rich spend almost nothing. They spend a tiny fraction because they are rich. They don't stimulate the economy. Corporate profits are now at record levels, but corporations are not investing them. They're using them instead to pump up share prices and also pump up executive pay. This is what they did after the Bush tax cuts of 2001, 2003. Economic growth stalled and then dissolved in recession. After the 2004 corporate tax holiday for bringing foreign profits home, you remember that one? They promised corporations would invest or expand. They didn't. The Reagan tax cut of 1981 did not cause wages to rise. They flattened. Most people have got absolutely nothing out of trickle-down economics. Nothing has trickled down. So what's the real formula for growth? Better access to education, healthcare, and transportation, all of which makes workers more productive. These more productive workers then command higher wages. With higher wages, they purchase more goods and services. These purchases motivate companies to expand and invest, create more jobs, better jobs. You see, it's a virtuous cycle. We ought to be worried about the competitiveness of American workers, not the competitiveness of American corporations. Big American corporations are global. They're owned by shareholders all over the world. Many big corporations can change nationality at the speed of an international lawyer's email. The one resource that's uniquely here on which our future standard of living depends is not our corporations, it's our working people, their productivity, again, their health, their education, their ability to connect up with each other. Now, for 30 years after World War II, we knew this, we understood this, we invested unprecedented sums in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. We financed these investments through higher taxes on the rich and on big corporations. The highest marginal tax rate under Dwight D. Eisenhower, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Republican in the 1950s, was highest marginal tax rate, 91%. The effective tax rate after all deductions and tax credit was lower than that, yes, but it was high 40s, low 50s. We haven't seen anything like that. What happened to the economy? The economy boomed. Wages shot upward. Wages of the bottom fifth rose even faster than the wages of the top fifth. This unleashed consumer spending, which generated even more growth. That was a virtuous cycle. The Trump Republican agenda for growth, the Trump Republican tax cuts are going in the opposite direction. It'll take us in the opposite direction. They raise taxes on the middle class. That is going to reduce the middle class's purchasing power. The Senate version cuts the Affordable Care Act. That'll cause millions of people to lose coverage. It also explodes the federal debt, which will stymie growth. Republicans did not ever stop yelling about the federal debt. When Democrats are in the White House, when I was there with Bill Clinton, you couldn't have a discussion with a senator, a Republican senator or a Republican member of Congress without the first sentence being about debt. I couldn't go on television or on radio in a debate with any conservative without the first word out of their mouth being debt or deficit. And now they've gone silent. This Republican tax plan, it's going to create at least $1.4 trillion of debt over the first 10 years. Debt service itself is going to likely require cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, education, transportation. The current tax proposal is also going to eliminate the state and local tax deduction, which will likely cause many states to cut back spending on what? On education, infrastructure. All of this is going to slow economic growth. So when Republicans say that they're actually on the side of growth, economic growth, don't believe them for a minute. For years, they've been selling tax cuts by lying that tax cuts spur growth, which trickles down to ordinary Americans. For just as long, Democrats have been selling fairness, but Democrats have not been explaining why a fairer economy is also more productive and more prosperous. It's time for Democrats to make that case. It is true. It has the virtue of being true. Unlike the Republican case, the Democratic case has the virtue of being true. And now, for our third piece of tonight's puzzle, Trump and oligarchy. Now, behind everything else I've talked about tonight, behind the tax cuts and the differing approaches to the economy trickle down, or what Democrats should call bubble up, or we all rise together, is the basic issue of democracy versus oligarchy. And don't think for a minute that this is not really at issue. Because you see, as tyrants take control of democracies, they place themselves above the law. It's hardly a secret that Trump admires oligarchs like Vladimir Putin. Trump thinks Trump, should be above the law too. That's just what he's trying to do. With evidence mounting that Trump obstructed justice in the Michael Flynn investigation, his legal team is placing him above the law. I mean, just this morning, Trump's attorney, John Dowd, now this is Trump's attorney. This is not the Justice Department. This is his personal attorney. Dowd made a jaw-dropping statement. I'm just going to quote it to you. "The president," said Dowd, "cannot obstruct justice because he is the chief law enforcement officer under the Constitution's Article 2 and has every right to express his view of any case." Hello? A president cannot obstruct justice? This is what Richard Nixon was saying. A president is above the law. A president cannot possibly violate the law. A president cannot do anything illegal. Now, Dowd was in effect trying to respond to a tweet that Trump put out over the weekend suggesting that Trump, was aware Flynn had lied to federal agents before firing FBI Director James Comey. If true, this would be an astonishing admission of guilt. And then Dowd jumps in and says, "Oh no, Trump didn't actually send out that tweet. It was me. It was John Dowd." Now, how John Dowd got his hands on Donald Trump's personal Twitter account and how the President of the United States would allow anybody else to get his personal Twitter account is beyond me. Look, let's be clear. The federal crime of obstruction of justice applies to, and I am going to quote it, whoever corruptly or by threats or force or by any threatening letter or communication influences, obstructs, or impedes or endeavors to influence, obstruct or impede the due and proper administration of the law. Now, that's in any proceeding or investigation by a government department or agency or Congress. Obstruction of justice. Obstruction of justice. That's exactly what Trump has done in trying to prevent an investigation of Michael Flynn. It's what he did with firing Comey. It's what he has done since then. Obstruction of justice was also the primary charge that led to Richard Nixon's resignation. Now, we can't allow ourselves to become numb to the Trump presidency. He and his enablers are threatening the basic principles that guide our legal system, that no person is above the law. We've got to stay vigilant, organized, and mobilized to protect our democracy from these power grabs. Now, look, I can understand your discouragement. I can understand it if you feel as if you've been working hard against the things Trump and Republicans have been trying to do, and some of you tell me, you're not having much effect or as much as you want. You did, by the way, many of you did stop Republicans' attempts in the summer to completely repeal the Affordable Care Act, and you're having enormous effect. My basic advice to you is please do not give up. Giving up is exactly what they want. Not only Trump, but the oligarchs behind him and behind the Republican Party, the Koch brothers, the Mercers, the billionaires who continue to bankroll the most backward elements of our politics. They want you to give up. They want you to grow cynical. And then they can have it all. Please do not let them. And now for your questions. Vicky Smith Paluk. If the balance of power shifts to Democrats, do you believe a Democrat-controlled Congress, Vicky, I say Democratic-controlled Congress, will undo the damage of the GOP tax scheme? Well, it's going to be hard. Let me be completely candid with you, because in order to undo that damage, you're going to have a different law, a new law, to replace, if this in fact becomes law, this Republican tax cut, you're going to have a new law, and then Donald Trump, if he's still in power, he can veto that new law. So we do have to have a house cleaning, completely. A total house cleaning, Vicky. I want to talk about that. I don't have time right now, but I think we really do have to get serious about just getting every single Republican, including everybody from Trump on down in that White House, out. Just out of there. Stephen Morris. I hear talk of a constitutional crisis. What is that? What would happen? Have we had one before? Stephen, a constitutional crisis is basically when you have one branch of government, or even two branches of government, essentially overstepping the bounds of what the Constitution allows them to do. If Trump, for example, were to say, look, I don't care what they say, I don't care what anybody says, I am just going to assume more and more power. And it goes to the courts, and the courts say, no, Mr. President, you can't do that. And then Trump says, I'm sorry, I'm going to do it anyway. That's a constitutional crisis. It's when the Constitution is severely tested. That's what Richard Nixon, we had a constitutional crisis under the Nixon administration. What has happened in past constitutional crises in this country is our system of government, because there are enough people of integrity, responds and reasserts itself. Our Constitution reasserts itself. And the question I think that we all should be asking is, what if this maniac, who's now our president, unhinged, messianic, narcissistic, what if he actually does continue to get more and more out of control and refuses to be bound by anything or anyone? What do we do then? So it's not, Steve, it's not yet a constitutional crisis, but it could easily be one. Dan Covino, do you think impeaching Trump for obstruction of justice is a real possibility now? Dan, I have to, again, be very candid with you. I don't think we're going to see anytime soon an impeachment with the Republicans running both houses of Congress. It has got to originate in the House. And it's very, very hard to get an impeachment out of the House when the Republicans are in charge of the House. But watch the Republican approval ratings for Trump. They're still relatively high. But as they drop, and they have been dropping, then there could easily be a tipping point, even for Republicans. And remember, they've got their tax, or they're very close to getting their tax bill out. That's what they really wanted. I mean, Trump has been cover for them. He's been kind of a smokescreen. So let's assume that they get their tax bill through, and then Trump continues to rave, and the Republican ratings, his approval ratings, keep on dropping. Well, a lot of Republicans in Congress are going to say, let's get rid of him. Who needs this? This is an albatross around our necks. We don't want it. Then we get an impeachment. Sean Gardner Turner, can we get a UN investigative committee to help us root out corruption in government, as other nations have done? Sean, good idea. I don't think it's going to work. Finally, Rona Beitler, what should our main, most important focus be on right now? And Rona, again, it's 2018. 2018. Say it over and over and over. 2018. And it's these kinds of groups that I want you to focus on that could be enormously helpful to you in focusing on 2018. It's indivisibleguide.com. If you haven't visited indivisibleguide.com, please do. Find an indivisible group near you. Join them. Be even more active than you already are. Swingleft.org. Also very important to find what is a purple district or where you can have the most effect nearby you. And there are other groups that are also enormously important, doing great and important work. I want to thank Sasha Lightman and also Andrew Santana for your great help, your continuing great help. These are wonderful people. And I want to thank you, all of you, for your continued work. We're relying on you. All of us are relying on all of us. It is time for citizens, it is time for members of this society to do everything we can to rescue our democracy and our economy. And we will. We've done it before, and we will do it again. Please don't forget to watch our documentary, Saving Capitalism. It is very much on point. It's now on Netflix. Please, if you can, contribute to our little not-for-profit operation, Inequality Media. We depend on you. Thanks. Good night.